Hi, I'm Peter Russian. I want to share with you a new and exciting tool that we have introduced in response to demand from customers who've come to us and said, hey, how do we know how well we're doing as leaders in terms of applying the intent-based leadership approach? So this approach works either if you're at the start of a journey of thinking about we want to implement intent-based leadership, but we're not clear where we are at the moment and what the journey to travel might be. And it also works for those of you who have believed and have been working with intent-based leadership for a while, but want to understand how far is it embedded. Now, the challenge with a lot of this is we're not necessarily reliable witnesses to our own capabilities. Often that falls into the trap of we either hope or we think that we're doing better than we are, or maybe we're actually being down on ourselves and perhaps even that kind of imposter syndrome of thinking, well, I couldn't possibly be um, performing and working to the level of being an intent-based leader. So our objective with this tool is to provide something which is safe and reliable as a mechanism for understanding how far am I operating and reflecting the practices and values of intent-based leadership. So how do we do this? How have we gone about putting this together? Well, we've thought a lot about some of the pitfalls which are involved when you do traditional 360 style reviews. The risk with that can be they're maybe used, maybe abused sometimes. And particularly when it comes to scoring, we think that can be problematic if you're rating people either on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, or even using that traditional and well-known Likert scale of, I do this often, sometimes, rarely, always. The challenge with ratings is that we're feeling that we are judging people. And that presents perhaps a challenge both for people who are completing the review and definitely people who are receiving that feedback. So we've taken a different perspective. Rather than thinking about understanding where you are by rating you, what we've done is to put it into context. So instead, what we do is to think about what are your preferences as a leader? So let's have a look at the type of questions that we use. There are 15 in total, and we've just got a sample here. So you'll see the questions in the middle of the screen. And what we're interested in is what's our typical response and our typical behavior. When something goes wrong, do we take time to understand and explore it, or do we want to jump in and fix things fast? When we're describing a situation or an issue, are we likely to focus on the detail or explain the big picture? What's our preferred management style? We take a hands-off approach or we roll our sleeves and get involved. And one of the things that you'll notice here is either of these answers might be right. These are typical and everyday approaches and responses to situations. So what we're not trying to do is to make it very obvious in terms of what it means to be an intent-based leader and what it doesn't. So the idea, as with other review approaches, is we complete this ourselves and then we invite other people to give us feedback. And the invitation is key. You invite feedback rather than feedback being given to you. And so we invite feedback from others. And then what we're able to do is to compare what do we think and how do we see our own situation and how do others see us. So I thought the easiest way to show this to you would be to show you the example of my own profile, and you'll see it here. So this is the report that I got in terms of how I see myself. And what you can see is that it gives me an immediate analysis in terms of where I'm seeing myself against the principles of intent-based leadership. On the left-hand side, that's where I'm leaning more towards the practices and principles of intent-based leadership. And on the right-hand side is where I'm leaning a little bit away from. So that's helpful immediately in terms of thinking about how I'm seeing myself. But what's going to be really interesting is then to compare that to how do other people see me? And that's both in terms of understanding the overall perspective, but also a little bit in terms of my own self-awareness. So this is interesting. So now we've got the perspective of 5 people, not just one person. And what you'll see on the whole is it's reassuringly positive, but it's not without areas where I need to think and consider what might I need to be doing differently. And also what it's helpful for me to think about is how does my awareness and my perspective match up to others? And you'll see there's some differences. In the gray circle, that's my perspective, and I'm able to compare it to others. So this is really useful and really helpful for me in terms of understanding how I'm doing, how far I'm embedding the intent-based leadership approach within my day-to-day work and in my day-to-day language. We also then have the opportunity to get some qualitative feedback about what am I doing well as a leader, and also where are the areas that I need to think about and focus on from an improvement. What do I need to do more of? So that in this instance for me might be about thinking about different communication, about explaining and being clear about some of the environmental factors that maybe are challenges in terms of the way in which we do the work. We are obviously a remote business, and so the value of just communication, but over communication is important. And then that final block there is some really, really helpful feedback in terms of thinking about what happens when we're operating under pressure and whether I can maintain my approach and what do I need to do. So it's really helpful reflection. Now I can bring all of this together if we were doing this across our whole team. So this is when the shift becomes not just what are we seeing in our own profile, but how do we see ourselves overall as a team? And this would be interesting. This is a mocked up example, so this isn't reflecting the IBLI team. But what it shows in this instance is that there's an interesting balance. You've got some people who are leaning towards the intent-based approach, and some people, and there's some really clear areas where we can prioritize what needs to be different. So for this team in particular, what you'll see is that under the area of tuning control, there seems to be lean away from involving people in decision making. So that's a good area and a good point to start a conversation. So what we are intending to do in terms of using this IBLI3D team profile and tool is to give you the opportunity to be aware about where are you at the moment in terms of intent-based leadership. And the way in which we can do the analysis for this means that we're able to look at the gap between how we see ourselves and how others see us. And then what we're also able to do is to look at the whole team preference and then what that means in terms of the collective behavior, the overall culture. The way in which this works is that each person completes it. They invite peers to share their feedback. And again, it's inviting. And then we take the results and we have a one-to-one conversation with each person who has completed the IBLI3D to give them the feedback and to discuss what this might mean. We can also do this from a team perspective as well. Now, we've created this in response to demand from customers like yourselves who are interested in intent-based leadership. They're committed to it, or they want to start working with it. We see this as a great starting point, or indeed as an opportunity to sit back, maybe take a bigger picture and reflection. So if you're interested, come back to us, let us know, and we're ready to talk to you about how you can benefit from this really interesting and different approach. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again soon.